All right, we're going to close out with a bang here on St. Anne's stage. This is Cécilia. And they come to us from our neighbors to the north, Quebec. And a tip of the hat to the provincial government of Quebec who helped make their appearance here possible. But first I'll introduce him. This is Mr. Timi Turmel on the single double row accordion he's got there. Okay, one of the greatest accordion players there is. When he's not with, say, Cécilia, he plays with Laboutine Sorian, which is the granddaddy of all Québécois groups. On the fiddle, Courtney Drew. And over there on the piano from Ontario, Erin Leahy. Now, when the French came to Quebec and Nova Scotia centuries ago, they, of course, brought their music with them. They brought the tunes and the songs. But it was 250 years ago that the English on the plains of Abraham took away the French possession of Canada. The culture has hung in there for well over 250 years. But as the English and the Irish and other groups of people came to Canada, that music melded in with the French music. So what you're going to hear, today's Québécois music, the tunes, some of them are French tunes, but some of them are Irish tunes, some of them are Scottish tunes. But it's the rhythm that makes them, to me, French. The way they're played is absolutely distinctive, and nobody plays it better. Please welcome Cécilia.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. On est vraiment... Est-ce que je peux vous parler en français? Oui, OK. S'il y a quelque chose, Erin va traduire en anglais. Donc, on est vraiment content d'être ici. Ça fait longtemps qu'on est booké, puis ça fait longtemps qu'on avait hâte d'être là, puis c'est encore plus à ce que ce qu'on s'attendait. Fait que c'est vraiment cool. Vous avez un super beau festival, puis on veut les remercier de nous avoir invités, puis comme il disait, merci au gouvernement du Québec d'avoir fait en sorte qu'on puisse venir ici. Fait qu'on va avoir un petit 45 minutes avec vous autres. Ça va être super le fun. Gênez-vous pas pour danser, pour crier, pour sauter, pour taper du pied. Erin, elle va traduire.
Yes, I will just say we're so happy to be here. We had a first performance at the other stage, and it was wonderful, and what an amazing festival. We're going to keep the music going and play a set for you now that is typical in places like Quebec and the east coast of Canada, where people would group tunes together, and they start with something a little slower and then gradually bring up the tempo a bit. And so you might have a sequence of anywhere from 4 to 12 pieces. We won't do the 12 pieces version, but it gives you a sense for how the music gets transmitted from one generation to the next, whether it's at a kitchen party or a sugar shack or a square dance or a jam session or other things like that. So here is a medley called Wally Range.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I'll try to speak in English a bit. The next tune that we will do, it's a really, really old Irish song written by a really, really, really old Irishman. His name was Turlough O'Carolan. Maybe you heard of him. He was a harpist in the 1600 something. So he wrote that tune called She Begs She More. So it's a Gaelic name to say little fairy mound, big fairy mound. So the story about that, I heard it was a war between those two little hills. So I think it was like a fairy war, like the tooth fairy maybe, and the ring fairy, la fée clochette, c'est quoi? The one in Peter Pan. I don't know. Yeah, this one. So, but we never know. Nobody knows who won, but the song is really beautiful. So we will play that.
Stupid French thing. What did you say? Oh, you went to that. The origin of the berries. The do what you done and what underground.
How many of you is this the first time that you're hearing Cécelia play? Or any of you guys there this afternoon? I feel like yes. Well, you've heard the show almost as many times as I've played it. So I'm actually subbing in for their usual fiddle player, Louis Schryer. So it's my third time playing with them. The first time was 2 days ago, and then the second time was earlier today. But we're gonna do a set of tunes now. A jig, and do a reel.
Courtney Drew! That's a nice song too. The next tune that we will do, it's one of my composition. I don't play a lot of them, but this one I pretty like it because it's easy. And so I really like the simplicity of pop music with the four chords. I think it's the only four chord they know, so they play it. And so one time I was sitting at the piano and just playing those four chords, and I wrote a tune on that with the accordion. So it sounds a bit pop, but it's a bit catchy too. So I call it "Stuck in My Head."
was a medley of ragtime pieces, the 12th Street, the black and white at the end, and the maple leaf in the middle. And just a shout out to all you Americans. I said at the previous show just how much stride and ragtime has influenced my style of piano playing, and thank God, because it was really a turning point for me. And all of those composers are American composers, so what the world has to benefit from this great music that came largely from your country and Europe as well. But us Canadians in the North are just so grateful. And as I said before at the other show, this type of music influenced so many popular styles of music today. And I still love to play it. So an homage to you.
You're welcome. On behalf of Scott Joplin.
So after consulting, we're at our last number for today, but it's a big one. It's like, yeah, you will love it. Again, we want to thank you for being there. You were a great crowd, and we had fun up here. Thanks to
The crew.
to that guy at the monitor and PD, I think, there. Thank you. They did an awesome job. It's like 15 minutes for coming up upstage, doing a sound check and play. It's like, it's not a lot, and they do an amazing job. So thank you for that. So, if you love our music, we've made an album in 2020. I know it's a store somewhere you can buy CDs. I don't know where it is. Market Street. Right there. So it's really not far, so you can all go. So yeah, so we'll finish. We will. Sorry.
And tomorrow we're playing at the Market Street stage.
So that's it. So we'll finish with Elias Carroll tune called "That's Right Too" with some other nice tunes with that. So have a really good evening, and see you tomorrow maybe.
Cécilia. Now, don't forget to go over there and take some of that music home with you. I know I will. And they'll be back tomorrow on Market Street, so you can catch them again.